we're going to be discussing landscape photography and the concept of contrast and focal point. So turning something into a black and white photo and making sure that there's a good balance of black, white, and gray is a great way of emphasizing shapes and composition while still creating the mood that you want to incorporate into your photograph. So this is an example of a really simplistic landscape picture, and I just kind of want to show you what contrast means. So as we've defined before, contrast is difference, all right? It's putting two things together that are different to create visual interest. If you have high contrast, it means things are really different, like black and white. There's that opposition. When there's a low area of contrast, it means that everything is kind of the same. Same is boring. It doesn't really catch your eye. It doesn't catch your interest. So I'm just gonna make this feel a little, I'm gonna drop down the contrast in this photograph. There's some really nice darks in here, these dark greens. But if I lower the contrast, I'm using Photoshop Elements, by the way, but contrast is a editing tool that you should have in any basic editing software. But in this one, when I go to contrast and I lower it, you can see how, like in that grass, it changes, it makes the darks lighter and the lights darker, so everything kind of goes similarly the same. If I up the contrast even more, I get super dark darks and super bright lights. You kind of want to find a balance of what it is that you like, and it's easier to see in black and white. So you can shoot it in black and white. I always like to shoot in color in case I want to keep the color reference, and then I edit the picture with color. Okay, so in this program I have an option to convert it into black and white here, or you can, if you have a saturation button, which saturation makes all of your colors way brighter if you super bump up the contrast. Obviously, I mean, you can, I love having a highly saturated picture. I think they're really cool. But if you desaturate it, it takes out all the color. So when I take out all the color, here's the thing that I see. There's a lot of gray here, and I really don't have any whites. And so whenever I talk about having a balance of black, white, and gray, that's what I'm talking about. I want to see more of the whites, and I want to pick up more of the darks so I can really see some of these textures. Because right now, when I squint at it, everything kind of goes the same. So if I go back to that contrast, and I up this contrast, it's gonna slowly make, I have more of a white and more of a dark. If I don't like how I wanna see maybe more of these grass blades, I might be able to brighten it some, or darken it some, or brighten it some, and come up with something that I find aesthetically pleasing, something that I think works well for the mood of my photograph. If I make it super bright, it's not gonna go that bright because it kills most of the shapes, but if I go really bright and I lower the contrast, do you see how it's not quite as interesting? But when I have more contrast, a little bit brighter, I can see a lot of these shapes and I have more texture, more visual interest, and then, like I said before, I have more of a mood. Another thing that I want to point out is down here, you can see the thumbnails of my pictures that I'm going to use as examples. A thumbnail is just a small version of your picture, right? We see them all over the place. What's cool about a thumbnail is you can kind of know if you're on the right track compositionally. If I go to this picture here, so again, I can change this to black and white. I'm going to desaturate it because it's a little bit easier. And again, when I just change it to black and white, it's not quite as visually interesting because I'm not looking for those colors. And so I want to brighten this a little and up the contrast. Just when I up the contrast and I brighten the picture a little bit, those shapes become more interesting. There's a little bit more energy. I have higher contrast between my darks, my medium values, and my light shapes. So again, a good balance of light, dark, and mid value. So again, when I look at my thumbnails, this is an interesting thumbnail. I have a cool composition, I have this framing by this tree, and I have these brighter whites, and then a medium value, and then these cool darks that kind of take you through the picture. Let's skip over here to this one, and I can do the same thing. This is definitely one that I'm going to brighten and change the contrast in. So if I go too bright, it's definitely not as interesting, but if I change it a little bit, it makes that difference. That higher contrast really makes the design more interesting. So again, this one has less whites and more midtones, but I definitely have a separation between, I have a black, a white, and a gray. Here's something else to note. When you're doing landscape photography, something that you'll find, and you will notice it if it's wrong, is that horizon line. So that line that separates your sky from your foreground, if that is not straight, it's really distracting. So make sure that when you take your photograph, you are being careful with how you hold your camera and that your lines are straight. If I've talked about that grid display on your camera, this is another really great place to use a grid on your camera display, because then you can make sure that that's actually straight. If it's not straight and you go to edit it and you're like, I really love this photo, it has everything I need, but it's really crooked and it's really bothering you, a lot of times there is a straighten tool, or you can crop it to straighten it. You can take a vertical formatted landscape picture, because we're just taking pictures outside. You can also take a picture of the city, of buildings. It can be an urban landscape, it can be rural, it can be in the suburbs. It just needs to be something that's outdoor and not about a person, but about a place. So this was an example of a picture that I took in New York City. If I, again, change it to black and white, initially this is all very gray. It's not super interesting. It doesn't really have any interesting darks to kind of anchor the picture. It kind of looks foggy and overcast. The sky isn't super interesting, but if you take and intensify that contrast, all those little shapes really stand out. And again, like that thumbnail is way more interesting than that. Does that make sense? So again, when you have those darks to anchor it, it really makes your photograph, especially in black and white photography, more interesting. So don't just change your picture to black and white. Really make sure you edit it so like when you look at the thumbnail, it's interesting, it conveys the meaning that you want, and that it has a great balance of black, white, and gray. All right, now that we've discussed contrast and focal point and kind of how to edit your picture, I want to talk about mood, the last kind of piece that I want you to focus on in this landscape project. Mood is defined as that general atmosphere of feelings of your piece. And you can think of peaceful, energetic, kind of brooding, mysterious, etc. You're trying to capture the energy, the spirit, the feelings associated with the place. So what does it make you feel? So especially when you up the contrast and brighten the picture, that really helps intensify those feelings. Now to really wrap up everything that I've talked about, these are the points that I want you to take away from it. I want you to edit your landscape photo in black and white. I want you to look for contrast, which is that difference, the opposition, that balance of black, white, and gray, because our contrast focus is value, or your lights and your darks. If it looks decent as a thumbnail, you're probably on the right track. So think about composition. Does it look good when it's really small? Does it catch your eye? And speaking of eye, does it have a focal point? Where are you looking? So is there a specific place that has a high area of contrast where the most darks and lights are close together, or is there a tree or maybe a small building? There's something in it that your eye has a place to rest. And mood, again, did you capture a mood or a feeling or a spirit of that place to make your picture really shine? And again, if you ever have any questions, please email me at jpeterson@utahonline.org.